So I'm Dr. Faaeza Jasdanwalla-Williams, and most of my research has revolved around women in the early modern period. And today, too, I'm going to be talking about marginalized voices. So through the ages, the voices of women have often been buried under overwhelmingly male experiences, opinions, patriarchal structures, and institutions. So have things changed today? Are women's voices being heard more equally, globally today? There is some degree of parity evident, but the picture is by no means uniform. What about the voices that fall through the cracks? What about the voices of migrant and refugee women that are still silent? So these are the voices that are the most marginalized, and they have much to say, and what they have to say is crucial. So the issue of immigrants, migrants, and refugees is a volatile one currently, and has been for years. Referring to the influx of migrants and refugees as an invasion is not helpful to anyone apart from those that wish to profit from it politically, of course. The rhetoric of migrants and refugees coming in, draining our resources without contributing or integrating is an argument that is sweeping and often quite untrue. The us and them terminology also further deepens the schisms. So they are individuals that belong to different countries, communities, cultures, and each individual has a distinct story, experience, and background. And they have often fled from horrific situations under traumatic conditions. As difficult as it may be for some male refugees trying to kind of settle into their new environments, women from more traditional and segregated cultures face additional challenges. So often culture and language form some of the main obstacles to seamless integration. So women, for instance, who belong to more gender segregated societies find interacting and assimilating in a more gender inclusive environment, often Western environments, quite uncomfortable and challenging at times. Also, in some cases, women might be uneducated or illiterate, or then speak only their native tongue. And they find it then difficult to negotiate life in an alien language environment. So integration in these instances can be a long and arduous process. And the official local and national groups that are working with migrant and refugee women have to be sensitive to these issues. I'm not suggesting that these language and cultural barriers or the limitations of belonging to patriarchal structures are hindrances to assimilation that cannot be or are not being surmounted. So many women are very keen to share their experiences. They want to make friends locally. And in situations of crises, it has also been found that it is women who take action and are integral to the rebuilding of the lives of their families in their new environments. I have come across a few migrant and refugee women who are very eager to share their experiences and to kind of settle into their new environments despite facing certain challenges. And this is not just the case because they see me as another person from an ethnic minority background as well. So it might also be useful to just keep in mind the kind of policies that are already in place to protect the needs of migrants and refugees in general. So the UN General Assembly between the years 1976 and 85 declared that decade as the International Decade for Women, Equality, Development, and Peace. And this brought international attention to refugee women. And in 1990, the United Nations High High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, set out its first policy for refugee women. But a recent 25-year retrospective assessment of the UNHCR policy concluded that while there had been some progress made, the gap between rhetoric and reality was still quite wide. And there also needed to be a systematic means in place to make sure that migrant and refugee women's voices were heard. In 2016, the UN Women Assessment also came to a similar conclusion. They said that migrant and refugee women's voices were missing from the actual policies and actions and decision-making process. Later on that year, in September 2016, there was the UN Summit for Migrants and Refugees. And it resulted in a unanimous adoption of the New York Declaration, which aimed at a more comprehensive plan to protect the needs for migrants and refugees. So since then, there has been some progress made. There have been some steps taken, but there's a long way to go. And we don't need to look very far. Until very recently, Manston was a prime example. And of course, many of the residents there were women. So what kind of efforts have been made to date to kind of hear, to listen to the voices of migrants and refugees? In 2019, Malala Yousafzai, through her book, We Are Displaced, highlighted the stories of some refugee women and girls, and she also included her own story. And the common thread through all these narratives was an intense sense of longing for their homeland. There's also been some research done on migrant women in Asia, Southeast Asia, and in some parts of Europe and Britain. But a very current study on a migrant and refugee women's group in London concluded that mainstream services are still failing to engage with migrant and refugee women. And they are not responding effectively to their needs. In Wales, there has been a current study, a relatively recent study, last year actually, where the stories of some high-achieving women from long-settled ethnic minority and mixed families was highlighted. So, but this just shows that the hitherto silent voices of migrant and refugee women themselves is still relatively silent. And they should not and cannot be forgotten. And there are efforts in the offing to ensure that their voices are heard. I am currently involved in a project which is aiming to document some of these stories, but this is just a start. So why is all of this important in the first place? Why is it so important to listen to the voices of marginalized women? Migration is inevitable. It is an inevitable part of our future. Women are going to continue to form a substantial part of incoming migrants. Despite the challenges that they face to seamless integration, they will continue to prove to be integral to the rebuilding of the lives of their families. We cannot assume that just because they face these challenges to seamless integration, they do not want to integrate. We must not assume that just because they do not speak the language of their new environment, they do not want to share their experiences or make their needs known. So either we can continue on this counterproductive path of negative rhetoric, or then we can start engaging. And how do we engage? On a local level, we can make a difference by getting involved in local aid groups that focus on welcoming migrant and refugee families and make sure that they get all the resources to settle into their new homes. We can also volunteer and get involved in informal gatherings where we can help migrant and refugee women, for instance, practice their new language skills. And these kinds of informal gatherings are a great, very effective means of actually forging friendships. Resources are always needed to make migrant and refugee families basically settle into their new homes. And we can definitely get involved in fundraising events for this purpose. So again, my involvement in activities such as these has greatly aided in my understanding of some of the problems, some of the challenges that migrant and refugee women are facing today. And most importantly, it has helped in interacting in a much more sensitive manner. On a national level, we can get involved in groups, as in the UK, for instance, there's Refugee Council and Refugee Action, where they campaign in general for the betterment of the conditions for refugees. And in particular, they also campaign for the specific needs of refugee men, women, and children. These are, of course, all on-the-ground approaches and kind of on-the-ground means of getting involved. And individual interactions and personal experiences will vary due to individual differences. But it is only when we start listening to all voices, including those of the most marginalized, that we can even start to understand the conditions, the circumstances, the reasons behind migration, and include these marginalized voices in the actual processes of policies and actions that are aimed towards protecting their needs, that are aimed towards easing some of the challenges to integration that they face. Whether this results in empathy or not, this will certainly aid in at least moving towards coexisting in a less hostile and more inclusive environment. Thank you.